One of the things that's often true of novels and novelists is that a novelist will have a character who makes a single decision of some sort, and that decision changes the course of the life forever. And when I was thinking about talking to Doris Bentley about her marvelous time in Mars Hill, it occurred to me, Doris, that you made one decision in your life, probably in 1954, which changed your life forever. And that was the decision to come to Mars Hill.
You're correct, yes.
Because from then on until now, and I was thinking about that, it's been 55 years. And you never really ever left. I mean, you physically left for a while, but there was always a connection.
We're gone for 10 years and then came back. And it's interesting because when I came to Mars Hill, I came sight unseen. I had never been on the campus, had never been on the campus. I had heard of Mars Hill because some students at my church in Roanoke had been students here, and then we'd had youth revival teams come from the college to do revivals in Roanoke. And when Fred decided he wasn't going to Virginia Tech, that he was going to Baylor, I said, okay, I'm going somewhere. And I said, I'm going to Mars Hill. I called, asked if they would accept me as a student. I hadn't taken any SATs or anything. And they said, yes, come. So I came. Francis Nelson had assigned me a roommate, and we remained roommates for the 2 years that we were both here.
That was an incredibly simple way to happen.
It was.
Did you not consider going out to Baylor when Dr. Bentley? He was also going to be in music too, wasn't he?
He was in music also.
And you all met because of music?
No, well, we actually were high school sweethearts.
Oh, okay.
We were in the choir, the high school choir together, and that's where our paths first crossed.
I had heard that you had met through the choir, and it occurred to me that I always knew you, both of you, because every Sunday see you in church, both in the choir singing, and so you continued to do that your whole time.
As we were frowning at our children when they were misbehaving in the congregation.
I'm sure that was not an unusual thing. When Dr. Bentley went to Baylor and you came to Mars Hill, you knew you would be here only 2 years because at that time it was only a 2-year college. And in 1956, when you were graduated, by the way, I thought that it was interesting, you were graduated in 1956, the year that the centennial was celebrated. Then 50 years later, you were here to give the commencement address. So that there was an incredible connection at 100 and then 150.
I couldn't believe 50 years had passed.
I couldn't, well, I can't believe, because you and our lives are similar in time, I couldn't believe, myself, that the time had gotten on in such a quick way. When Dr. Bentley left Baylor, how long after that did you all? Actually, he was still there when you got married.
We got married in 56, in June of 56.
Right after you were graduating.
Right. And I went there and worked while he finished 2 more years at Baylor. Then he decided he needed to get his master's, so I worked while he got his master's at Southern Seminary. Then he decided he needed to get a doctorate, so I worked while he got his doctorate at Indiana University.
Did you mind the work?
No.
Because you all had
we had a goal.
Okay. What was that goal?
Just to make a life together. And I always said that wherever Fred was happy in his work, then I could be happy. And we've had some wonderful lives, some wonderful places that we lived, and met some fantastic people along the way.
I was fascinated when I read, one account I read that said that Dr. Bentley finished up his work at Southern Seminary, even though he had decided at that point he probably was not going to be directly involved in Christian ministry of any sort, but that he had felt that indeed he started, so therefore he was going to finish that degree. Also, I noticed too that he did a degree in his doctorate in a program that was relatively new at the time.
It was college administration.
Perfect.
Which was really new. And it was interesting, I think, too, because of his liberal arts background in music and then in religious education, and then to be a college administrator, and then to be an administrator in a liberal arts college. I think it all just worked together.
It was an incredible background for his coming here. I remember reading the story about Mr. Mears calling Dr. Bentley when this job came open after Dr. Blackwell. Dr. Blackwell was getting ready to retire, and called Dr. Bentley, who then was at the University of Louisville at that point. And Dr. Bentley had said at that time he was not really interested in moving because he had just found a situation he liked very much. And yet Mr. Mears persisted.
He did.
Tell me what was that decision like? What did Dr. Bentley tell you about?
Well, when Carl Mears first contacted Fred, Fred said no. And but as you say, he insisted, and he actually called us. Fred and I were in Chicago. He had a meeting of some association up there, and I was able to go with him. Called us in our hotel room, and I don't know how he found out where we were or anything. But anyway, he just insisted that Fred come for an interview. So he did. He went down to Charlotte and had the first interview with the board, or with part of the board, and was very impressed actually, and agreed that he would come back and I would come with him for another interview. And he just felt like it was a college that was looking forward. It wasn't set in time, and the trustees had high hopes for this college, and he wanted to be a part of it.
Were you surprised that it turned out to be Mars Hill, since you already had the history?
Oh, totally.
It totally
Well,
coincided.
the way it came about, John Claypool was our pastor in Louisville at Crescent Hill Baptist Church, and they had contacted John to see if he were interested in being president, and John said no, that was not his calling, but then he recommended Fred, and it just kind of went from there.
Kind of went from the interim now in the nearly 10 years. That would have been about 9 years after you had left. You all had 3 children, and Dr. Bentley had gotten his 2 degrees, and so a lot had really happened. And then really, at the college, a lot had happened because we'd gone from a junior college to a senior college. So in the interim, while you all had been away, then Mars Hill also had gone through changes into becoming a senior college. In 1964, the first graduating class. So when Dr. Bentley accepted the job to come here, everything was different, essentially, both for you and, of course, his coming into a situation which was brand new. Was that intimidating?
It was in my thoughts, but once I got here, it wasn't. My first thought, well, did I do anything that I would be embarrassed about? Because I knew so many of the teachers were still here, there were staff still here, and I didn't know what kind of mold they would expect me to fit in. But they were wonderful. They were accepting, they were encouraging and supportive, and just let me be myself.
So it was
wonderful.
an easy transition.
It really was, yeah.
I wondered how that would be for you, knowing then too that of course you didn't know, I guess, when you first got here, that did you know that Dr. Blackwell was going to be living next door to you?
We knew that, yes.
Was that awkward?
Not really, no. No, Fred had a little, there was a little contention there after a couple of years with some things that were going on in the community between Dr. Blackwell and some of the faculty members, but all of that worked out. And that made us determined, and Fred didn't fault him for that because he had given his life to this college. And Fred said, I would be the same way, and that's why when we retired, we said we're going to move away and keep our nose out of any business that's going on.
I thought that was a very astute decision, on Dr. Bentley's part, that once he had finished his term here, 30 years, that indeed he would move away and both of you would go to a lovely place which you had already found down near Morgan.
You know how we found that, don't you?
The boat wasn't...
On a boat on the Price is Right television show.
Yes.
When he was at Indiana University. When he finished his doctorate, he was in the government department at Indiana University working with contract students, and was in New York for a conference and had a little free time and got tickets to the Price is Right and was chosen to be on the program. He won a boat and a piano.
A piano?
A piano. Still got the piano.
Still got the piano?
Yes.
So the boat was there for the stint.
So we wanted something on the lake.
How'd you find Lake James?
We had some friends in Morganton. Jerry Norville, actually, is a Mars Hill graduate. And Fred was on his way to Raleigh for a meeting. Stopped off to just have a cup of coffee with Jerry and said, "Got anything for sale on the lake?" He said, "Actually, I do." At that time, there weren't that many places available on the lake. He says, "I've got one that hasn't even been put on the market yet, but I just found out about it." So Fred went out and looked at both of those places. He came back to Mars Hill and got me, and I went down, and we signed the contract the next day, and he never made it to his Raleigh meeting.
That's funny. And it became, and still is.
It still is.
Still is
Our
home.
Yes.
I thought that was very neat for you to have it, so that when you left, there was a very easy transition for you. Did you consciously, when you came here as the First Lady, decide how you were going, what kind of First Lady you were going to be? Did you think about what would be expected of you or how that would work?
I did. I knew there would be a lot of receptions and things like that. And we immediately said we don't want long receiving lines. So we did away with receiving lines and kind of made things not quite so formal, a little more informal and relaxed. And the first few years I was not that involved because my children were small.
Yes.
They were like 3, 4, and 7
Yes.
when we came here. So I was pretty busy with the
I
children.
remember thinking that your role, having been a student here, and then coming back as the First Lady, that, and it was a different era, how you must have thought a lot about how you were going to negotiate that. I remember reading about Mrs. Moore, who came here in 1897 and for a long, long time ran business things, you know, in the business office. And then Mrs. Blackwell was pretty much a housewife, I guess. And then after that, then here you were. And I remember that you took, at the point where the children were old enough, you became a part of the advancement office.
I did work in, well, we called it the development office back in those days. When Jim Cox became director of development, he talked to Fred, because I had, when they did the first campaign, right after Jim was hired, they did a special fundraising campaign, and they needed somebody in the office, so I worked for about a year doing that, and the children were all in school by that time. And then when that was over, Jim asked Fred if I could come into the office all the time, if I would be interested. Fred wasn't too interested in my doing that.
Did he prefer you not be here as opposed to being home?
He had just never been used to women working that much because his mother had never worked. And he just felt like it was the man's place to be the provider for the family. And he said, but if you really want to do that, if it would fulfill your needs, go ahead and try it. And I did, and I loved it.
Well, I remember when I first met you 40 years ago. It was before, actually, you had gone to the development office. But I remember the time that I was here on active faculty, it was such a joy to go over there, you know, because you were the front office for that function on campus. And I often thought that, you know, I said, how can anybody turn down giving money to the college if they have to talk to Doris Bentley? She's so gracious and charming that you want to give money right away. And of course, Jim Cox had taken that job on and ultimately became enormously successful in that.
He was wonderful in that. He kept up contacts with so many people and was a real people person.
And he knew everybody.
Yes, he did. And he never tried to finagle anybody or, you know, force them to do things. He would just, in his calm, easy way.
And very pleasant
Yes.
to everybody on team. I remember the story, and I thought about it as I was thinking about talking to you, that when shortly after Dr. Bentley got here, both of you were getting settled in, and then suddenly had to deal with the accreditation people.
Oh, that was big.
This was, everything I read about that must have been a horrendous experience for both of you, because suddenly the school was to be accredited as a 4-year institution, and had come from a long, long history of, what shall I say, a sort of paternalistic or avuncular approach where things were done more like a family. And then suddenly you're in a 4-year institution where one is expected to be very mature.
You have to reach some very high goals.
High goals and high academic standards.
Mhm.
And Dr. Bentley was suddenly thrust into this at a very much of a disadvantage. What was that like for both of you?
Oh, the study had already begun when we came. There was a faculty committee that had done a lot of the research, and then Fred just had to carry it forward. And it was very difficult because it was a very difficult accreditation team that came from Saks. And when they first came, in fact, the chairman of the committee didn't even have any of the papers, any of the background work or anything when he came. He just had lost it, hadn't bothered to bring it, hadn't read anything. So Fred immediately got copies for him, and he said that he would read it, but he wasn't very encouraging that we could be accredited.
So there was a sense that the man had not done his homework.
He had not.
And really was not particularly
Right.
interested in this field.
No.
What a terrible position.
It was a burden, it really was. And then we were given provisional
Yes.
accreditation and had to reach some certain standards that they had set out. So Fred immediately began to work on that. And one of the main ones was faculty academics,
Yeah.
getting more PhDs and all of that on the faculty, increasing library holdings, a number of things like that, all of which took money,
Of course.
which made him have to cut out football.
Yes, tell that story. I know there was a great deal of flack about that.
There was. I remember that was the first time the students came and boycotted our house. They stood out in front of our house. Oh, I don't know how many, just a big mob, carrying candles. And that candle wax stayed on the sidewalk for many years afterwards.
So it might remind them of that.
So Fred went out. He said, "I'll be glad to talk to you, but not here. Let's go down to the auditorium." So he sat there and answered any questions that they had until most of them just left. He just had more patience than they did.
And that really only lasted about
A year, yes.
The board understood the need for that because money was such a
Right.
issue. But clearly there were a great number of alumni who were very unhappy that football.
Oh yes, he got lots of cards and letters.
I'm sure he got lots of cards and letters.
Another thing connected with that same thing was getting federal funds from the government, and he had to go through the state convention.
Tell that story.
They were meeting in Asheville in '67, I believe, fall of '67, and he had not put that on the agenda ahead of time. But one of our trustees, I can't remember, one of the ministers in Asheville, made the motion at the convention that we be allowed to accept government funds.
Was that John Knight?
It was either John Knight or Nain Starnes. I can't remember which one.
They were both in that same group.
Mhm, right. It passed by about 60-40, but there were some ministers primarily who were really up in arms against that, and they came back the next day and wanted to rescind that. But Fred had already signed a contract with the University of Georgia, and once a contract has been signed, it cannot be rescinded.
So he was very wise then to plan that carefully all the way through, so that there was no way that indeed the convention would be able to take a step to go back on their word.
That's right.
But you know, the interesting part about that was that all the other Baptist colleges were extremely grateful to him because he opened the door to federal
That's
funding.
right.
They had wanted it, but had not been able to figure out how to get the convention to go along with that. So indeed, that move was probably a significant thing.
It definitely was.
Not only for this college, but for
For
all
yes.
Baptist schools. I was always very proud of, when I first heard that, I was always very proud of the fact that Dr. Bentley had been the pioneer. And
He was not very popular with a lot of people at that point.
I'm sure it was a step that was for the traditionalists who wanted to maintain that separate state church thing, probably an overlap which they didn't really want. But ultimately it proved to be the right thing to do.
We had to do it because to get the funding, to pay for teachers to go back to get their credentials, and just lots of other things that had to be done.
When Dr. Bentley came here, he was 30, and at that time was said to be the youngest college president in the United States. and yet was coming into a situation where he was essentially going to be so different in every way. He was not only young, but he was attractive, he was energetic, he'd been an athlete, he was a musician. Suddenly he put on a student beanie. He became a new image. I remember when I heard someone say that the first time Miss Nelson heard him say he was going to take off and go down and play tennis, she was horrified that he would leave the office and go and do something like that. And yet, clearly, he in a very gentle way, it seemed to me, accustomed the campus to a whole new way of thinking, bringing them up to what was probably a traditional modern times for most schools, but not necessarily for Mars Hill, because of the isolation, because of the Baptist heritage. But he had made, by virtue of example, lots and lots of changes.
He was a very hard worker, but he felt like there needed to be a balance.
Yes.
You need to have some fun time too, along with your hard work.
I remember Walter Smith talking about Dr. Bentley finding him working late one night and wondering why he was still working. Walter said, "I have to do this to finish my work." And I think Walter said that put Dr. Bentley in the mindset immediately of these people are working too hard and they don't get paid enough to do this. One of the things I know that several faculty people said that one of the reasons that Dr. Bentley was so immediately popular was that he quickly understood that the pay scale for the faculty was in nowhere close to what it should be. And he set about to rectify that very quickly. And so there was a great enthusiasm, realizing that the new president understood that the pay scale was not right, and that the way to want people to stay and to be enthusiastic about their work was to pay them properly, and he did that. He set about doing
that. Was one of his first goals.
I'm sure that was hard. Did he, when he first came here, did he work well with the boards, those original boards? Did they like him? Did they want him to be like Dr. Blackwell had been?
There may have been some, but I don't think there was any strong feeling like that. I think they were ready for change too. Right. And we just had a wonderful camaraderie with the Board of Trustees when they had their annual meetings, well, in December and then again at graduation. We'd always plan some kind of outing for them so that they had some time to get to know each other. They didn't just come here for a meeting and go home. Right. They got to know each other, they got to know the campus.
And that still exists.
It does, yes.
I still feel that, the meetings in the fall that Dan has, Dan Lunsford has, I don't know whether that was inaugurated when Dr. Bentley was here or not.
We started it, I think, I'm not sure exactly when.
It was a donors banquet usually somewhere in September.
Oh, no, I think Dan started that. Yes, Dan started that.
But that also became, that was not the board members so much as it was people who give them gifts.
Yeah, it was just a philanthropic kind of thing.
Right, a philanthropic kind of thing. But there was always people coming back here, a sense of, it's great to be back, and what fun and the enjoyment that they had clearly at spending time together. I've seen that over and over. In my time here, I had first heard about Mars Hill when I was in undergraduate school, not having any clue about what it was. And the young woman who had transferred out of here to the university where I was then attending just raved about this place. And I kept thinking, what is it like? I mean, she's totally over. She's the best missionary this place could have. So when I first finally came here, then I began to understand what all that was about. So,
it's like a family. Even though it became a four-year college, it still had that family feel that the junior college had.
Dr. Bentley was faced also not only with being sure that the standards were right for the accrediting agencies, but he was also faced with the idea of building departments that were solid. He saw that faculty went back to do their doctorates, for example, those who hadn't done those. But he also was able to establish, it seems to me, a very solid academic program for the school. At what point did Dick Hoffman come into the picture?
Dick Hoffman, when Dean Lee retired and we needed a new dean, well, that's when Dick Hoffman came in. and I don't remember the exact year. It was early 60s.
Okay.
No, we came in 66, so it had been toward the end of the 60s. But they just made the most wonderful team. And Fred and Dick were closer. I think Fred felt like Dick was his brother. They worked well together. Dick had wonderful ideas, and Fred was so supportive of those ideas. And of course, Dick was able to get some funding to carry through with his ideas. And it was just a wonderful marriage.
It was.
really
we
was.
On the faculty, we sensed that. I remember so many times going to faculty meetings where both those men were, and it was clear that they had great affection for each other. It was not that they didn't, that they just worked well together, but they also had this incredible affection. And it was clear to everybody that that was a part of their success. And there was a magic about that. I remember so well, Dick making suggestions about things, because he was in a very because both Dick and Dr. Bentley were very religious men. I don't think people think about that think about them that way, but indeed they were. And the whole idea of service learning, they both, I don't know who suggested it first, but it was something that they both seemed to accept and buy into very readily.
Yeah. And I think it was just the time for something like that.
Yeah.
Dick had the idea, and Fred endorsed it fully. And it just grew into a wonderful curriculum for the college across all of the disciplines, really.
I think, the various and sundry curriculum changes. I remember the commons-based curriculum. That was a huge deal back in the 70s.
Yeah.
Those were innovations when people came from everywhere to look at what Mars Hill was doing. And Dick, I know, had written grants.
Lots of funding.
Lots of funding there. But clearly, those experiments, which were successful in most cases, there were changes obviously over the years, but still, there was a sense, I felt this very strongly, that both men not only had a sense of this, to go back to the term servant leadership, but that they lived that. I didn't have close relationships with either one except in a professional way. But it was interesting to me to see, they both were doing it. Dick was going off to India, for example.
I think he did that right after he retired.
Yes.
Actually.
Well, he that probably had been
in his mind, wanting to do it.
To meet Mother Teresa and to study all that. And then here, you and Dr. Bentley both were, as far as I can tell, the best examples of servant leadership right here in Mars Hill. You both were active in the church. Every Sunday you were there, and all the committees that you chaired over the years, you were chairman of the deaconate at one point. And it was amazing to me that there was that incredible commitment to not only the college, but it was to the town, it was to the idea.
I think when you have been blessed in your life, it's your responsibility to give back.
Yes.
And giving back to the community or whatever the involvement is. You receive a blessing from it, and then hopefully you can help others too.
There was a great sense of that, both from you and Dr. Bentley, and also from Dick and Jean. There was a sense that all of you, that your involvement was very real and very sensitive, and there was no pretense about any of it. I thought that was the best example of servant leadership that I could find.
I appreciate that.
It was here, and it was very obvious to me that was very true. I think about all the accomplishments that Dr. Bentley had here. Of all the things that he did when he was president for those 30 years, what do you think made him most happy?
I think one of the things that he was most proud of was when he was taken into Southern Association and became the president of the whole Southern Association, because he had had such a terrible time with that first committee that came. Yes. And he felt like Southern Association had a big role to play, had a big responsibility to the colleges and universities that they accredited, really. And he just felt like it shouldn't be taken lightly. And so that was something that he really was proud of, that he was able to accomplish that. But I think the main thing is just, well, academic freedom. That was one of his big things. He said he would die in that trench.
And everybody admired him for that
Well,
too. It was a
he had
great
to fight for it.
It was a big deal to most of the faculty. I'm sure to all of the faculty, and although we didn't talk about it much, I never will forget in a faculty meeting where he said one time, this was early in the time when the Southern Baptist Convention began to go through some changes, and he said if there's ever not any point where someone comes in to want to take over the college, that's the point where we leave the convention, because we must preserve our academic integrity.
Right.
So he clearly had that in mind. I think he would have forfeited any monies that would have come out of the Baptist organizations to preserve that.
Oh, definitely.
I was very pleased about that. I never will forget, one time he used to get annoyed with us in the theater department. And yet he was one of our greatest supporters.
Right.
Which, you know, because Jim Thomas would often do plays that were potentially controversial. The idea of getting to make people think, you know, and sometimes there would be letters. And of course, the funny part about it was that when people complained about the productions, they wouldn't write to us. They'd write to like
yes.
He'd get all the letters. And one day I heard him say to Jim, I just wish you all wouldn't plan to do all these controversial plays when the Baptist ministers are here. You remember that? So we laughed and laughed about that. But one of the things he said to me one day, which I shall never forget, he says, I may not approve of what you all do over there, but I'll never shut you down. That was the greatest vote of confidence anybody could have ever said.
I think he wanted you to be sensitive to the
Yes.
constituency.
Yes.
And I know a lot of times the language was
Yes.
a little rough. And,
Yes.
and I know at times with certain plays and whatever, it needs to be there. But
He was right. And Jim Thomas was very, very sensitive to that. He and Dr. Bentley had a very good relationship.
right.
They admired each other very much, and Jim was always aware that even in choosing plays that might be controversial, that we would not step over the line that would put Dr. Bentley in a bind, because he would have to ultimately deal with it. And occasionally, when we did plays that were potentially awkward, I thought Jim was very wise to do seminars and discussion
That
periods
was wonderful, yes.
so we could understand why these subjects were out there. I remember you're going to one after a play we did called Getting Out.
Getting Out, that was a terrific play.
It was a very powerful
It
play,
was,
and very,
yes.
very harsh and very thoughtful. And I remember the actors in it were very moved by the work they were doing, because they had not considered that topic, what happens in jail and people getting out and all that goes on, they had not dealt with this.
No.
And so for them there was a growth factor, and even though the play was harsh and rough, it was important, I think, for those kids to have
It
had that
was.
experience.
And then to have the seminar following it,
Yes.
so there could be
Good talk.
discussions about
That's
it.
right. And so it was not done for shock effect.
Right.
It was done as a learning thing. I always thought that Dr. Bentley, and you too, how both of you were able to do what you did is amazing to me. You would go to, everybody on campus wanted you to attend the events, music events, athletic events, theater events, and yet, I honestly, everywhere I go, there you'd be, and I'm thinking, how are they doing this? When do they have any time at home? Was it hard for you to?
Not really. We had to use babysitters a lot when the children were younger. But with everything being so close, it really was not that big a deal. And one thing about it, our home was our sanctuary. We didn't get a lot of interruptions when we were at home. We loved having people in, we'd always have the open houses and things like that. But people respected our home, and I really appreciated that.
I was very much impressed when I first came here. I noticed, I had met Dr. Bentley when I first came to direct the play, and then 3 years later I came back actually to join the faculty. I had noticed when I first talked to him, there was a sense of, how shall I say, the formality about him, which was very, very intriguing in the sense that you're dealing with someone who is professional in his work, and there was an attempt to treat you the same way. and clearly he was looking at what you were doing, but it was about the issue at hand, whatever it was. In that case, he offered me a job, which I didn't take right away, and it came later on. But I always thought that he handled, I guess the term is familiarity. He was charming and gracious, but there was always a little bit of distance that he kept, which I thought was a great protection for him.
You know, that's interesting that you say that, because actually being in that position is a lonely life.
I know.
You can't forge too many close friendships
No.
with your colleagues.
I discovered a similar thing as a director of the theater, because I would be directing people, you know, who were auditioning for plays, and if I didn't choose them, you know, then the friendship is in jeopardy. So I understood that, and I knew that there must have been some element of loneliness in that. And yet, he was one of the most gregarious and charming people there ever was. I remember when I first came here, Otis Duck and Betty had a party that they invited, I guess it was the faculty and staff to, and we all played bridge downstairs in that house. And I was so new here, so green, and somehow I ended up at the bridge table with Dr. Bentley. I thought, oh gosh, I better do this well. The first thing I learned about that was that he was fun, but that he was also, he really was a player. He really was an enthusiast for what he really wanted to win. And I think I picked up on that immediately. And I felt that in his work as a president. He wanted to win. And I think when he was here for 30 years, Marzio did win. You know, he had his own ways of doing things. He was a competitor. There was a sense of that. And I liked it because clearly he was out front. I didn't always, I wouldn't have wanted to be in his place for all the things that happened that were not happy during the time he was here. I remember so vividly when the young Japanese boy took his life and how hard that was on both of you.
It was hard on the campus.
It was.
It really was.
It was. It was devastating because it's a foreign culture. We didn't know why he took his life, and his family comes from Japan.
They didn't understand.
They didn't understand. And I remember earlier than that Sally Bell Moffitt was one of my students, and you know, she was found dead.
Vista worker.
I think that's it. And nobody ever, you know, quite knew. That was a horrible story, and I thought, how does a president handle this? He's got to deal with family. He's got to deal with the students who are broken up. And he's got to keep the faculty together. It was, he handled all that with great finesse. I always admired another thing he did, and I wondered if you all had a thing at home about a home like this. Whenever there was a problem on campus that dealt with faculty or staff that threatened to explode, or to go in someplace that wasn't pleasant, or get in the news, he immediately dealt with it. He called the faculty together, or the staff, and we talked it out right there. I remember twice getting an announcement, getting a call. Dr. Bentley's having a call meeting this afternoon at 5 o'clock or whatever it was. And the faculty's expected to be there. Well, we didn't know what this was. You thought the school was going to be closing. It was so desperate. But he dealt with those things quickly, expeditiously, and it was over. And it didn't have time to fester or to get into the rumor mill. I thought that was a neat way of doing things. Was he that way at home?
He didn't bring a lot of that at home.
Really?
No, he didn't. Often, I kidded him. I said, we'd have to get out with the crowd before I knew what was going on down on campus.
Yes.
But he would make decisions, and if he felt like he was making the right decision, it would be made, and he'd never question it again.
Well, it worked for him.
Yeah.
And I think people respected that because they knew once he had made his decision, that was it.
He didn't make precipitous decisions.
No.
They were well thought out, and that was it.
That was it. And we sensed that he would stand by those decisions. I remember he did something in the 80s. He announced one day that he'd like to spend a half an hour with all the faculty each.
Oh, I remember
this?
That. Yes.
Well, I thought, what is this about? Well, it was a difficult time for him. I remember the early 80s had just been hellacious here on campus. campus
But,
because
yeah, the economy was really bad.
the economy was really bad.
Yeah.
The decision had been made that there would be at least 20 people who would have to leave the campus because there wasn't enough money. And I cannot even imagine what that must have been like for him. You know, these are people whose careers and lives and children, their families are affected forever, and he knows he's got to deal with this. You know, at the time.
But you know what I remember? He knew something about every faculty member that came for their interviews. And I think a lot of times the faculty were astonished
Yes.
that he knew those things about what they were involved in their research, in their writings, or in their classes, or whatever. He knew something about every faculty member.
And most of us probably did not perceive he thought in those terms.
Right.
I remember I sat down in his office, and the first thing he said to me, and I thought I was unglued, he says, "See, what I perceive? You are not political." Well, it was a surprise. I didn't think about that. I'd never thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was quite true. I was not a part of campus politics.
Mm-hmm.
I was too busy directing plays and trying to
And
keep
writing.
and writing and trying to keep up that I didn't have time to deal with all that. And really, it would not have been attractive to me. But that he had picked up on that, I thought was very, very interesting. It was a very telling half hour, and a very good half hour, in a very positive sense. And I thought he was there was a very wise move on his part, because people needed reinforcement,
Right.
and that was a time we needed to have it.
Mhm.
I later was so pleased that both of you were supportive of the faculty bash. You remember when
Oh, they were wonderful.
when they came along in the
Oh,
early 90s,
yes,
an
yes.
attempt to, and that was really an attempt to give us a gentle way to end the school year when so
And
much
to kind of boost morale and
Yes.
everything,
and
yes.
to boost morale. And
Yeah.
both of you were very gracious to support
It's
that effort.
fun.
And I think the faculty and the staff had a good time at those, and were able at the end of the year to put away the things that might not have been so much fun during that time.
I think you're right.
In the-
And that was your idea.
Well, it was
wasn't
my
it?
idea. It came about one day in a faculty enrichment committee meeting. I kept thinking, we're all so unhappy right now. The campus is so miserable. We lost people, and there was the morale problem. And I said, we can't do this. This place is too important to be in this funk. We need to get out of it. And so I suggested it and sold it to the committee, and they said, let's try
That was
it.
good.
And so that's how it happened. And I think there's some version of it still going on, and I'm pleased about that. In the mid to late 80s, we all began to feel that Dr. Bentley was, well, he'd been here 20 years, was tired and needed a change. It was clear that the ramifications of the work were getting to him, and certainly that time of exigency must have just taken an incredible toll. What was it he wanted to do?
He wanted a change in responsibilities,
Yes.
and wanted to put Don Schmeltikoff in charge. And the trustees just didn't go along with that. So they worked out a plan of division of responsibilities, which Fred didn't have to carry the whole thing. And Don took on more of those responsibilities.
And then Earl Lanning came in at that
Earl
point
came in,
as the
yes,
dean.
yes.
So that there was a very different handling of responsibilities in that job. So he was free then to go and get
He
money.
was able to be out and do more fundraising.
Right.
Didn't have to be on campus as much.
And you also then ceased being full-time in your
Right.
office at that point.
I
so
did,
So you
and
could
was
do
able
that.
to travel with him.
Tell me about Miss Nelson. You know, she was such an incredible character. When he came here as president in 1966, he had inherited her she had been the associate to two former presidents. What was that like?
She was wonderful.
Was she?
She really was. You know, not too long, well, Fred had decided, you know, he would never get rid of Frances Nelson as long as they could get their responsibilities worked out. So early on, he had a meeting with her and just kind of laid out, you know, whose responsibility was what. And he said, I know you have taken on a lot of the responsibilities of president, really, at times. And he says, but that's got to change. And she was wonderful. She came on board fully and was so supportive. I don't think he could have done it without her.
Well,
because she knew everybody.
She did. She knew
Yeah.
everybody, and she knew everything. You know, and of course, I came here after that period, and you know, there was nobody I knew who was more supportive of Dr. Bentley than she.
And she always was.
Yeah, she was right there, and she understood that the college was first for everybody, and that's where she was.
Yeah.
It was fascinating. I got to know her in a different way over the years, and I didn't know until she was actually in Gibbons Estates, you know, many years later after she retired and was not well, that Dr. Bentley had indeed been a part of her helping take care of her affairs. And she always was so grateful for that.
She always looked after him. And she learned first on that if he gets hungry, he gets very grumpy.
Yes.
So she always kept a can of nuts in his bottom desk drawer so that if he was having a sinking spell, he could get him a handful of nuts.
Right. Well, she was quite something, and everybody on campus knew that, you know, she could be very protective too. Sometimes sometimes you couldn't get to Dr. Bentley as quickly if you had to go through her because she was protecting.
She was.
You know, it's one thing I meant to ask you a while ago and I forgot. Tell me, I know that Dr. Bentley had a Fulbright at one point to go. Did he not?
No.
I somehow thought that I knew that he had gone to. Did he go to France ever?
He went to France, but not on a Fulbright.
Okay.
He did his doctoral dissertation on French higher education.
Ah, okay, that was the connection.
And so he spent about 4 months in France.
Did you get to go with him?
No,
Oh,
I
you had the
just had a
children.
baby.
Oh, that's right. There was no way. There was no way you could go.
I had a baby in January, and the end of January, and he left the early February and came back in May.
How unkind.
Right.
to leave you with all that responsibility. Yeah, I knew he had gone to France, and I somehow misunderstood about the Fulbright. When it became clear that in 1996 he wanted to stop, I think I remember saying that if the trustees found somebody, he would stop whenever. Is that right? Whenever they found somebody?
Right.
And so the trustees got busy and indeed did.
Right, and Fred stayed on until the end of the year, not on campus that much, because Max Lennon had come in, and we were doing some traveling, some fundraising, and so we did that through the end of '96.
So it rounded out pretty much a 30-year period of time.
Right.
It's amazing to me that within a period of 100 years, there were only 3 presidents here. Dr. Moore came in '97, then Dr. Blackwell, and then Dr. Bentley, and that was it.
That was it.
You just don't find that anymore.
It was interesting because when Fred became president, one of the first things Francis Nelson asked him, well, are you going to stay here as long as Dr. Moore and Dr. Blackwell did? At that point, Fred had no idea. But
How did he, I know he must have had nibbles along the way for jobs other places. Did he ever seriously consider leaving while he was here?
He looked into a couple of them. A couple of them we talked with the children about. They were not interested in moving from Mars Hill. And the more he thought about it, he said, no, I have a job to do here and I want to stay until I feel like I've completed it.
I know that after you were moving around, having children, Dr. Bentley was finding jobs, and so at some point, though, you decided to go back and finish your degree.
I never did totally finish it. No, I took classes all along, but I never did finish my degree.
Well, you didn't have time with all that was going on.
No, I didn't.
Which leads me into another area which I know is so important in your life, music. I think when I first came here, I was not aware that you were a singer, and then I heard you sing in church. And I'm thinking, my goodness, and then I figured out that you had studied with Dorothy Robertson.
I did, yes.
And you continued to study with her for a while.
I did. When we came back, I still took some lessons from her. She was a wonderful teacher.
Yes, and students, really had a lot of faith and interest in the work that she did with them over the years. And she was still here when I first came to teach, so I got to know her pretty well. What was it like being here as a student under Dr. Blackwell?
He was very open to the students, and we all felt like we knew him. There were some restrictions that I kind of resented as a student. One was required chapel in
yes.
assigned seats.
Yes.
And it wasn't that I was anti-chapel or anti-church or anything, but just the fact that we were required and attendance was checked at chapel. Another thing I thought was so crazy was not being able to go to physical education classes in your workout clothes or shorts or whatever. You had to wear a raincoat over that. There were some, but mainly I didn't mind the restrictions. You know, the closed study hours that we had to be in our rooms by 7:30, and had quiet hours until about 10:30, and then lights out at 11. I didn't mind that. No?
And yet, some of these things you were talking about like maybe changed.
You did.
Because I know that the required chapel changed during his administration.
Right.
And my guess is that that was not an unhappy thing for the students on campus. It was not about giving up chapel, it was about the regimentation.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then I think one of the legacies, the great legacies that he left here, and I know he worked very, very hard to see that the college did have a chapel.
Right.
So that the Roy Hill Chapel is a great legacy to him, because it was a building which I think he must have poured his heart into.
Well, there were so many volunteers who
Yes.
worked on that building, you know, faculty, staff,
And the
other
Baptist men.
volunteers that came in, the
Yes.
Baptist men, yes. So it was a labor of love.
It was a labor of love, and we all sensed that it meant something very, very special to him. So to jump from that time of the 60s where chapel was being crammed down your throat to a period where chapel is a pleasure to go to once a week is a whole different ballgame.
And that's the way it should be.
Well, of course that's the way it should be, and he was clear that he understood that. Speaking of music, I was interested, and I forgot that you did a play. You did Mrs. Peru.
I did. That was such fun.
With the Music Man in
Right.
1986. Jim Thomas came to me one day and he said, you know, Dr. Bentley's going to be celebrating his 20th anniversary very soon, and I want to do the Music Man. He said, I love doing that show. This would have been his third production of it. He said, we had a great success with it here a long time ago. And
Well, they had done it for the inauguration.
That's right.
That inauguration week.
That's right. And then Jim had done it since at Parkway Playhouse, so he had to have another go at it.
Okay.
And he said it'd be the perfect time to bring it back for the Dr. Bentley's 20th anniversary. He says, I'm asking him to conduct the overture. Well, of course, the students were just agog. Nobody knew he had this musical talent, because that's not the person we saw.
Right.
And I remember hearing Dr. Bentley say, he says, I just hope I don't screw this up. You know, because he had not
Conducted in a while.
for a long, long time. And yet, when he walked up, I remember that opening night, he stood there in the orchestra pit in Moore Auditorium and conducted. It was like, well, he's been doing this forever. It looked very, very natural. And you, of course, had a major role in that show because you played the mother to Marion and to Winthrop.
Yeah, that was fun. Getting to work with the students and Jim Thomas, I'd never seen him direct and be under his direction.
That's right.
And he was very good.
Well, I remember back in 1975, you were on the first board at SAR, and you and Fred both were involved in some way the whole time you were here with that organization. Jim was very much aware that he wanted the theater here to represent not only the best in theater, but to get people away from the idea that we were hillbillies and that sort of thing, the typical cliches about Appalachia. And I remember that both you and Dr. Bentley were very supportive in that organization, and quite clearly, it probably would not have existed over the years if Dr. Bentley had not been able to help financially when there were places where there was no way to keep it going.
It's hard to keep theater going.
Well, I often thought about that. There would have been no way that anybody could have afforded a PR person for the losses, the amount of money that was lost. So the college is in the newspaper every day because of telling what's playing that day, and the college is right there. And I thought Dr. Bentley was very astute to realize that was good.
It's good PR.
It is good PR.
Yeah, it really is.
You were there on the every day. You were being mentioned
Right.
every day, and this was very helpful. When you went to back after you left the college and went to Lake James, there was a whole new life ahead. Every time I read about Dr. Bentley, he was doing some strange thing. I read that he went to get his contractor's license at community college.
He did.
And I'm thinking, you know, he's retired. Why isn't he resting? That for him, that he would have been bored out of his mind.
When he retired and we moved to Morganton, he said, I will not serve on another committee.
Good for him.
I want to do hands-on work. And he just always had an interest in building and in Habitat. So we both got involved in volunteering with Habitat. And the general contractor died. So they were looking for a general contractor, and he said, well, I think I could do that. So he went back and got his contractor's license.
He worked at Habitat for Humanity and built 40 some odd houses. It was amazing. I mean, he was Rotary's Man of the Year in Morganton.
Right.
And both of you were active in Morganton, still are.
In the church.
Still in the Morgan Baptist, First Baptist Church. One of the things which I know you've done for years is to do volunteer work in the hospital environment. Are you still doing that?
I am not. I did that from when we first moved to Morganton and was very involved with it. But I just decided I needed a change.
Yes.
So in December, I retired from that, and I'm now volunteering primarily with Habitat. I work in the office one day a week. The office person is off on that day, so they need somebody in there to answer the telephones while the executive is out doing whatever she has to do, and thoroughly enjoying it. And doing our church volunteers one Saturday a month, so I volunteer with that. And then there's a group that comes down from Waynesboro, Virginia, have been coming for 14 years, and spends a week in July building, and so I work with them, and it's just been a great time.
But that's been an extension of all these other things you did. I was interested, and I knew that much of this was going on, but while you were here at the college, you were president of the League of Women Voters in Madison County, president of Pittsburgh Girl Scouts Council. It goes on and on. And last year, in 2008, the North Carolina Baptist Heritage Award was given to you.
That was quite an honor.
That's a lovely honor, Doris. The Baptist State Convention and the Council on Christian Higher
I
Education.
appreciated that.
But honoring service for a career, and that was quite. I got a wonderful recognition of your work. In the 1996, you were Marshall Alumni of the Year. So that over time, you have given an incredible amount of your time.
I have been inordinately honored. I'm not sure all of that was due, but I enjoyed doing volunteer work.
Well, it was a special gift to the people who were benefits of that work. I remember so vividly being aware that you and Dr. Bentley were caretakers on another level. Kathy Wallen, with whom you worked in the administration building, had health issues, and then when Mrs. Watson died, Noel Watson, also with health issues, and Dr. Bentley took on the management of his care, and you were constantly looking out for Kathy's care. So those were things that were beyond the volunteer kind of work that people do, but actually caring for other people.
I think when you do things like that, I receive more of a blessing from that. As a part of my deacon responsibilities at First Baptist in Morganton now, I'm on the homebound spiritual visitation team, and we take communion to those who are homebound and can't come for communion. And I always receive such a blessing from that. And so I think when you give to others, then you get back.
They do a richer for it.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me that you and Dr. Bentley both embodied that wonderful giving spirit that the college has had over the years. And of course, it came from your own spiritual centeredness, I would say. What do you think? People ask this question all the time. What do you think is the special thing there is about Mars Hill?
It's family. I think you captured it so beautifully in Treasures within this place. Every time I hear that song, it brings me to tears. It's so beautiful.
Thank you.
And it's a special place. In fact, I was talking to an alum just the other day. We were on a committee at church, and he is an alum of Mars Hill. And he went on from here to Wake Forest and Chapel Hill and several other colleges. But he says, you know, my heart is at Mars Hill. He said, that's the one that I always come back to. And I think those of us who have been here feel that.
There was a sense of family you felt even as a student.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
And then when you came here, of course you had your own little family when you came here, but there was in a bigger sense, there was a feeling of family.
Extended family.
Extended family. You and I just left before we came to here, a meeting of the retired faculty. And I always feel in that group a sense of affection.
I do too.
From
Yes.
those people, they feel very strongly about the place, but they feel an affection for each other, which is nice to see.
It is.
It's nice to see. I know that you, for fun, I remember the Red Hat Society. What have you all done recently?
Oh, we just do silly things, mostly just useless things. We go out to lunch primarily,
Yes.
or, you know, things like that. We have a bingo night, and it's just purely for fun.
I remember several years ago being over at the Barna Theater, and there was a big bus pulled up in front of the theater, and all these ladies got off. They were wearing purple outfits and the red hats, and you know, people were just standing there going, "Who are these people?" You know, and of course, I know the name comes from the poem, and
When I'm old, I will wear purple and a red hat.
when I'm old, I wear purple and a red hat, which I thought was delightful. And the object, I think, if I've understood it, is that there is no object.
There is no object.
You just have fun, which is great.
And everybody needs that every once
Yes,
in a while.
I think so. Totally to get off out of the routines and all the ruts. If there were one memory you could take away from Mars Hill, from both the time you were here as a student and your time as a president's wife, what would it be?
I think the main memory would be the people. The people who are on the faculty and staff, the students, and it was always so wonderful to see the students. And then when they'd come back for homecoming or whatever with their wives, husbands, their children, and share what they were doing. That was just always such a joy.
And they probably all made a point to come see you and introduce you to their wives and children.
Oh, yes.
So you
yes.
felt like you really were.
Well, and then when the children started coming
Yes.
as students, that's when you begin to feel old.
Yes. And to end our interview, I have to ask you about your children, how they are, and what they're doing these days.
Well, my children are doing fine. Both boys are actually general contractors now. They have done a lot of different things like insurance and real estate and investment banking and all of that, but they decided they wanted to follow in their dad's footsteps, I think, and become general contractors. So they're trying to build houses, even though the economy right now is not the greatest in the world, but they're loving every minute of it.
Good. Well, are you surprised that they went that route?
Yeah, I was. But they've always liked to do hands-on things too, as Fred did. And then Rhonda, of course, is a physical therapist. She is not working now because they just recently moved from Billings, Montana to Missoula, Montana. And so she's getting her boys settled in school. They've been there for almost a year now, and are just doing great.
That's so far away. You get to see them very often.
I'm going out in August.
Good. Good.
It's so interesting though. When Jim Thomas was in Bozeman, he saw Rhonda when she was in Billings, and he always kidded her about her Madison County accent. And she looked at him and she said, "All right, Mr. Thomas, who has the accent now?"
That's funny. That's funny. I haven't gotten to know your children as adults, and I've missed them because they've been different places and doing different things. Two things I want to ask you before we conclude. About the painting, the lovely painting that was done of you and the one of Dr. Bentley, which hung for a while in the library and then now moved into the Bentley Fellowship Hall. What was it? Who was the artist?
Well, I'm trying to think who did that. He was from Charlotte. And I'm blank on his name.
I don't
right
remember that I
now.
ever knew his name. Did you enjoy that? Was it done
Well,
from sitting?
no, it wasn't a long sitting. He came and took photographs and worked primarily from the photographs. And then when he was doing the finishing touches, we had to sit for a while. So it wasn't an ordeal.
It wasn't always, so you weren't long periods of sitting.
No.
And nowadays artists work from, they make lots of photographs and they're able to make work from photographs. But they are such elegant pictures, paintings, and it's always nice to go in that door. So you see them right away when you enter the fellowship hall.
I don't know, I'm always taken aback when I see them.
Well, I'm sure we don't ever see ourselves as,
No.
as others see it. One thing you mentioned working with hands, and of course it was true that Dr. Bentley, after he was retired, did indeed work with his hands a lot. But before that, and most of us did not know he had this great interest in working with wood. I remember he made the campus mace, didn't he?
Mm-hmm, he did.
And then the great legacy he's left behind are those beautiful doors in the chapel. Where was his workshop? I never knew where it was.
I don't know where that interest came from. It just came up out of the blue.
Really?
One Christmas, he asked for some carving tools, wood carving tools for Christmas. So I gave him a set of just little wood carving tools. And he used those to carve the chapel doors. He carved those doors in our family room. We had a pool table in one end of the family room that we'd put a ping pong table on top. And that's where he did the carving of those.
So he was really right there in the middle of
It
everything.
was right there in the middle.
So
And
you
the
were-
dust was in the middle of everything.
Yeah. So you actually were watching the progress of this as he was doing it.
Yes.
Did he ask for your input on how he might arrange those?
Not really. He just did the Old Testament scenes, just went through
Through the Bible.
the Bible, yeah, just,
And then
the New Testament the same way.
It was such a surprise to all of us, when we saw that, because I think none of us knew he was at all interested in wood carving, or he had achieved such a level of expertise. And that remains a wonderful legacy. Every time I go in that door, those front doors to the chapel, I always stop and make myself focus on one little place, because when you see it all at one time, it's more difficult to take it all in. But if you focus on one scene, and you know he's done this in relief.
And I love the one that's in the prayer room there in the chapel.
Yes, I forgot
That's
about
one
that.
of my favorites.
Yes.
And then, of course, the one down at the library in the Bonner Scholarship, Bonner area,
I don't know that
in
I
the
know
lower
this one.
part of the library.
I don't think I know this one. What is it?
It has the hands and a child's hand and an adult hand. I can't remember what all the scene
What's there?
it is, but it's a lovely
I
one.
love it. Well, you were talking about having so many wonderful things happen in your life. I can't imagine what Mars Hill would have been like without you and Dr. Bentley. For a period of the 30 years that he was here as president, it was a vital time, an interesting time in history. So many unusual things happened in history. Education changed like crazy. And there was a sense of solidness and stability here that I think we all may not have realized until after he left. That there was a renewed expectation. When new people come in, there are always changes. And suddenly you look back and say, oh, well, Dr. Bentley was really onto that. We didn't think about that at the time. You look back and you see things in perspective. So for both of you here, there's been a happy marriage of place and a life.
It really has.
Thank you, Doris, so much.
Thank you.